I'm so pleased you've joined us for another episode of the After Dinner Leadership Podcast, when I can introduce you to our new guest, Simon Lancaster. Simon is a master communicator. His YouTube TED Talk achieved over 3 million views. It's called Speak as a Leader. And he is a master in rhetoric. When we talk about rhetoric, effective rhetoric is one of the keys to impactful leadership. Why? It opens up the mind, rhetoric unlocks the heart, and it gives us access to shared, meaningful, and memorable experiences with our audiences. As you listen to this episode, you should even be able to play back what rhetorical devices I just used. And the good news is we have room around this dinner table for more than yourself. So please subscribe, please pass this on, please share this with a friend or family member who you think would enjoy the messages that Simon has to give about communicating really well. Enjoy. I'm sure it'll have a great impact on your ability to communicate more effectively. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Simon Lancaster along, author, speechwriter, speaker, someone who has inspired me. And if you haven't seen his TED Talks, I strongly recommend that you do. And I've found that they've given me some really good insights into ways I can improve my skills in communicating and rhetoric. So welcome, Simon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Fellow Simon as well.
That might get a bit confusing for listeners, who knows? But there's enough difference in our voice that they should be able to distinguish between us. Really good to have you. And you're calling in from Wales today. I'm in the other side of the country, and really nice to be united in the tech world today. And grateful that we can speak about the topic of communication and leadership and seeing how important they are. I mean, one of your TED Talks was about Speak Like a Leader, I think was the title of it, which it's over 3 million views. And I remember seeing it several years ago when it first came out. And obviously I watched it again in preparation for today. What's that like as a TED speaker? How is that preparing for one of those events?
It was so exciting. I'd always wanted to do a TED Talk ever since the earliest days of TED. And when I had the offer come through, I was like, oh, wow, this is it. So it was like really the pressure is on as well, because you're a speechwriter. You make your living out of helping people give good speeches. This really, really had to be good. And I put absolutely everything I had into it. I didn't have an awful lot of time to prepare, actually. Sometimes there's like a 9 months lead in for those things. And I think I had maybe 6 weeks or something like that. So as it goes, it was quite quick. But I think because of that, I had the urgency, which is helpful. And I loved it. It was such a fantastic experience. I knew it had gone well when it got to the end of it. I mean, the reaction in the room was exceptional. And like, as I left, people were coming up and asking for my autograph and stuff like that. It was really, really thrilling. And so I knew it would be good, but you never know what's going to happen when it goes on YouTube. Like most of the TEDx talks that go on now, they do well to get out of the hundreds of views. And so when it dropped, I was checking it, like you do when you do a post, you're like, how many people like it? How many people like it? And I was like a really needy little boy on that first day. And I was like checking it every few minutes. And you could see instantly, I think on the first day after it went on the site, it had about 1,000 views. And then within a week, it was like up to 10,000. And then I think within a month, it was 100,000. And I was just like, yes, there we go. That's it.
That's great.
Yeah. But no, I loved it. And it was so wonderful doing it in Italy as well, in Verona, which is such a gorgeous, oh God, gorgeous city, gorgeous weather, gorgeous people, gorgeous food. You know what I mean? I was living my best life that weekend. Yeah, it was great.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing your insights to the world. Excellent. We'd like to ask each of our guests a series of quick fire questions, 1 minute, short answers, and just get your kind of instinctive responses to these. Are you ready for that?
I think. Go for it.
Here we go. Name.
Simon Lancaster.
Organisation.
Bespoke speechwriting services.
What is a characteristic that you value in others?
Energy. People who come into the room and light it up. I can't stand people who just kind of like walk in and they're not bringing anything in. Energy. Give me your energy.
What's one of the best speeches you've ever heard?
Oh my God. There are too many. Oh my Lord. Straight away, the one that kind of comes into my mind is a very weird one, actually. It was a Malaysian preacher to about 2,000 people who had everyone literally like waving their hands in the air, and I've never seen anything quite like it in my life.
What's the cause you're passionate about?
Truth.
I love it when someone speaks right on that bass note. It just cements the point beautifully. Truth. What is it about truth that raises passion in you?
Well, I think there's so much bullshit around, and as a speechwriter, I'm very good at generating bullshit myself, but I'm also very, very good at sniffing out bullshit from other people. And I think there's so much bullshit in the press and in politics, and I'm very, very tuned into it. And I just love it when people do tell their truth, actually.
Yeah.
And you know it when they are. You can just feel it as you can just pick up like little cues in people's body language that tell you when they're speaking bull.
Right. And tell me about the Malaysian preacher then. I know there was a short excerpt of that. So what was the context for you witnessing that speech?
Really random, actually. So I work around the world with both delivering training courses, working one-to-one with people. And I've been lucky enough to work in Malaysia, I think maybe about 15 times over the last 10 years or so. It's a gorgeous country. I mean, get out there. It's wonderful because, you work out there and you manage to squeeze in a weekend. You just nip off to an island. You can't do that out here. But you can go to the Isle of Wight. It's not quite the same as going to Penang or something like that. And when there was one time when I was out there and my host, a very, very kind lady, said, "Oh, you've got nothing to do this weekend. Why don't you come and spend the weekend? Spend Sunday with my family. We'll take you out for a lovely lunch. You love sushi and all of this." And they were a religious family, and I didn't know they were a religious family. But as part of that, they took me to a Christian evangelical church service on the Sunday morning. Now I'm kind of like classic Brit, really. I guess that I did all of that stuff at school, sung hymns. I did get confirmed, which probably puts me, slightly in a minority. But I'm not much of a believer. I'll go at Christmas or whatever. But anyway, I went along there, and the preacher was absolutely flipping incredible. Absolutely incredible, and was speaking with so much energy. And one of the things they did, which I found absolutely fascinating, because I was kind of like dissecting what he was doing as well as getting moved by it.
Sure.
And he got everyone to like literally to hold their hands together like that. Hold your hands above your head. Stand up. Hold your hands above your head. And now you see how you feel. You're not setting yourself free here. You're tied. What is it that's tying you? What is it that's preventing you embracing Christ, embracing the Lord, embracing your religion? Say your hands free, and now just wave them in the air. And he got me doing this along with I don't know, 1,000 to 2,000 other people. And it was absolutely incredible. It was like almost approaching ecstasy,
Yes.
I'm talking about the feeling, not the drug, before we start going down that route. But it was, it was something else. And I've since tried working like some of that stuff, just gently, how you can, use your physiology and get other people to engage with their physiology in some way, just to really create an indelible experience. And I remember coming back from that trip, and literally, I remember saying to my wife, I think I had a bit of a moment when I was out there. And I said, I'm going to go to church this weekend. And that was such a huge mistake because round here, not many people do go to church. Once you go once, they never let you not go again. Um, and then even worse, they found out I could play keyboard, and then it was like, so you can play organ. And so I did that.
Right.
I then got, and literally we had to move house in the end. I lie. We didn't move house like because of that, but we did, But that was really something actually. I don't know why that speech sprang into my mind. Like
I'm glad it
literally,
did. I'm glad
I
it
could have
did.
done a
Yeah.
top 20 for you then of my favourite speeches, but that's quite a random one. It's a guy you would know, none of your listeners would know. But that's, I
Yeah.
think, isn't that an interesting thing that I think many
It is.
people, the speeches that really do stick in their minds are not your Rishi Sunak or your Keir Starmer, God help us, but they are actually they're much more local. They're
Yes.
people that maybe we know, and maybe the most powerful speech that any of us ever see or ever deliver in our own lives are like the eulogies, um,
Yeah.
or the
Well,
wedding speeches.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I mean, you took the spirit of my question in its truest form, which is not a speech that you may have watched on video, classic Martin Luther King, but something you've
Mm,
experienced yourself, and that was the spirit of my question. I'm glad you've captured that because I was at a wedding on Saturday, and
mm,
actually, the my niece got married. Her father-in-law passed away 3 months ago,
mm,
and the speech between the best man, who was his brother, and the groom was really moving. I mean, just like
mm.
deeply moving. You've got this mixed emotion of this celebration and the loss of their father that they were
Yeah.
sharing with us, and it was a really special moment to be part of, actually, and it's one that will
Mm,
stick with me. I've been to tons of weddings, but that kind of 20 minutes in the reception was really touching,
mm.
and
And
yeah,
doesn't that
it's really
teach
nice.
us something? It teaches us something really, really powerful and
Yeah.
important. There's a big insight there about what is good communication. That when people are just being themselves, they feel comfortable, you know, um, that's when they're credible, not when they're putting on an act, when they're speaking from the heart, when they're saying stuff that they really believe, that's when they're credible. And they're the secrets. It's
Yeah.
like it's ethos, pathos, logos, the old ancient
Yes.
Greek way of talking about it, which is your credibility, your emotion, how you put your argument. And you rarely see that being done better than at a wedding or a funeral.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
So for
And
me,
it
as a
it
speechwriter, that's
go
what
on.
I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get the business people, speaking with the same authenticity, the same honesty that they would do if they were just speaking to a group of friends, group of
Yes.
family members, people that they love, people that they feel safe with. Whereas so often what you find in business is that people go up there and it just looks like someone has vacuumed their personality out of their backside. You can almost see it disappearing as they go up to the podium. You can have a chat with someone over coffee and they're like really engaged, really enthusiastic, really energetic. And then they go up the podium and all of a sudden they're speaking in jargon, acronyms, and they have about as much energy as like a soggy cardboard box,
So how do
dead.
you work with somebody like you said, energy was this key characteristic you love. If you're working with a client who has got low levels of energy, or the energy is not sincere, perhaps, how do you
Mm.
help someone to bring the right level of energy to the speech?
Everyone gets energy from something, and you just need to find what their thing is.
Yes.
And it
Yes.
may be that when they're talking about the strategic plan to 2030, they don't have much energy, or they're speaking about business reorganization programs, they don't have much energy. However, it may be that when you get them talking about needlework or playing the piano, or the first time they heard Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, all of a sudden they've got energy. So it's like, right, that's our springboard, or when they're talking about their family, a lot of
Yeah.
people will get, or when they're talking about baking cakes, so you just wait until they're at their most energized. And then you're like, that's where we're starting the speech. That is where
Great.
we're starting the speech. And then that energy that they start from, as long as they start from that good place, they'll engage their audience. Whereas if they start with Today, we're talking about the strategic plan to 2030. And as you know, we've been through this benchmarking process. They don't care about it. Their audience is going to care about it. No one cares about it. Start somewhere else. Tell me about your passion.
Great.
And then you
Great
just make the
advice.
connection.
Well, the other thing that I'd like to just have you share with us is the tradition that we have on the show is, what 3 leadership lessons do you wish you'd learned earlier?
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear what those are for you.
Well, my first one is quite cliched, but it's really, really important. And it is be yourself. Don't pretend to be anyone else. Just be yourself. Don't be a phony. I think so many people, particularly when we're younger, and I think when I was in my 20s, I had an idea of what I had to look like, the kind of person that I needed to look like. And I grew up, like, I'm not seeking violins out or anything like that at this point, but, I grew up in quite a poor background. I grew up single mum, benefits, council estate, 1 bedroom flat. Me and my brother had the bedroom. My mum slept in the front room. So we
Yeah.
didn't grow up with money. And and I talk proper London, you know. And I remember when I first started work, all of a sudden I was like, I've got to sound posh. I've got to sound posh. I've got to sound like this. I've got to sound like that. I've got to sound the other. And I really, really felt like I needed to conceal my background. I very rarely would tell anyone that I came from a poor background. I wouldn't tell them at all, actually. I really, really
Yes.
tried to conceal it. And my revelation was working for Alan Johnson, who, I don't know whether you remember him,
Yeah, I
Simon.
do. I do. Yeah.
Great
Yeah.
Labour politician. And he
Yes.
was someone, and he grew up in poverty as well, but he never tried to pretend he was anything other than what he was. And he spoke in his authentic London twang, and he rose to the top. He's risen to the top of everything that he's ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
The union movement, politics. He's now a best-selling author. He's writing crime novels now. And he, for me, really, really taught me an important lesson, which is just be yourself. And that to me felt like total liberation. And now
Yeah.
I'm actually quite proud of my background now. So that's my
Great.
first one. Be
I
yourself.
love it.
My
Love it.
my second thing is stand for something. For God's sake, stand for something. Work out what it is that really, really matters to you, you know? And there are various ways that you can do that. And there are some exercises that I sometimes run with my clients. Like, I'll just show them a list of virtues, like things like courage, compassion, resilience, responsibility, honesty, humility, like just a load of buzzwords like that.
Yes.
Show them 100 of those words. Just say, which of these words matters the most to you? And then I'll ask them why it matters most to them. What was the moment in their life when they discovered why honesty or whatever was so important to you? And they'll tell me some great story invariably,
Yeah.
and this is the thing. Really find something that matters to you and then stand up for it. Don't just go with the wind on everything.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing is just keep things simple. Don't complicate matters. That again, I think, maybe because of my insecurities, the chip on the shoulder, because of my slightly poorer upbringing, I always felt I had to use fancy language. You don't need to use fancy language. I've learned the best communicators actually are really, really brilliant at distilling things just to the very most simple message, whether it's like Obama, yes, we can, or, God help us, Boris Johnson, get Brexit done. The power
Yes.
of just the 3-word slogan. So I guess mine would be keep it simple, or less is
Yeah.
more.
Very good. When did you first find out that this was something that you wanted to spend your life and career devoted to?
Well, I'd always been fascinated by language, even from the very earliest age. My mum was very, very literary. She would always have her 6 books out from the library at a time, and she always made sure that we had our max quota of books out of the library. And maybe because we didn't have a lot of money growing up, we spent all of our time in these books.
Yeah.
And playing word games as well. And literally, we'd play Scrabble an awful lot when I was growing up. And my mum would invent all of these amazing word games, including like, just literally opening the dictionary and like, what's this word mean? What does that word mean? Just, So I think
Sure.
I've always been fascinated by language. And maybe one of the things that really got me excited, certainly one of the first things that got me excited was watching Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister during the
Yeah.
1980s. And I'm of an age where I was watching that like live as it was going out when I would have been 11, 12, and I just bloody loved it. And I
Yeah.
loved how clever Sir Humphrey sounded. I loved the beautiful way that he would play with words and just construct these sentences like they were works of art. And of course, the people that wrote that program, I now know, were masters of speech writing and political persuasion. And so Anthony Jay, in fact, who was one of the writers on that, he wrote books on speech writing in the
Right.
1970s,
I didn't
which
realize
I've
that.
got.
But
Yeah, he did.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so he knew all of the tricks. So he was playing with the rule of three and rhetorical
Sure.
contrast, the power of metaphor. Um, and so I think that it was that really got my love of language going. And so then for me, when I was in my mid-20s, getting this job, because before I became a speechwriter, I worked as a minister's private secretary. So doing that job that you see Bernard Woolley doing in Yes Minister, that was my real job when I would have been about 25 or 26. I couldn't
Yeah.
quite believe it. I had to pinch myself. But it was wonderful. And then going from that job, when I did that job, you kind of get involved with the speechwriting process a bit. I used to give people lines for speeches, playing with a number of those tricks that I picked up with from Yes Minister. And in particular, I think I remember there was one line that got used quite early on, which I pretty much stole from Yes Minister. That I remember. I remember there was a line in Yes Minister that I can't remember who said it now. Um, whether it was Sir Humphrey or Bernard, but one of them had a little word play. It was a rhetorical contrast, and he talks about you've got political will and an administrative will not. And I just loved that because that summed up what the battle between Hacker and Humphrey was: political will and the administrative will not. And I remember very early on writing a speech for Patricia Hewitt, or maybe just coming up with a line for her actually, where I said about political will um, and no, economic will. The economic will is there, and it mustn't be trumped by a political will not. And it was
Oh, right.
talking it in the context of Britain joining the single currency, actually. And so this would have been about 2001. And I remember coming up with that line, and she said, "I love this. Who came up with this line?" And it was like one of her special advisors said, "Oh, it was this guy." And within a few months, I was her full-time speechwriter. So it was kind
Oh,
of coming,
fantastic.
stealing that line from Yes Minister, basically got me my first full-time speechwriting gig.
Yeah. Do you have a piece of work that you're particularly proud of outside of that, or it could have been that, but you know, yeah, is there a speech that you've been involved in that you feel particularly proud of?
All sorts of them in different ways, actually. Um, I love, I mean, I'm probably my personality. You describe my personality as really being like an instinctive people pleaser, I guess. I like making people happy. Um, and so I think some of the ones that I've written for big corporate CEOs, and I've been lucky to write for CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world, where they have like 300,000 plus employees. And I think
Yeah.
when I write an internal speech for one of those CEOs, which is really good and it sets out why they're doing what they're doing, where they're going, you've got a clear vision, it's really formed from a big base of morality. It makes people feel good. I love that. That's a great feeling. It's a great feeling
Yeah.
to write a speech that you kind of can think, oh, that's led to like 300,000 people feeling really pumped up for the year ahead or whatever. I like those speeches. But I loved working with Alan Johnson as well. So after Trish Hewitt, I worked for Alan Johnson, and because of his background, it was great to work for a politician.
Sure. You kind of
Um,
synchronized in some way with his style and background. Great communicator, by the way. I'm not
mm,
making any political point here, but he was always someone I
mm,
enjoyed listening to in radio interviews and some of his speeches. You did get a sense when he was communicating that he was truth telling as best as he
mm,
could. And you don't always get that with politicians, but he is someone I do remember as I liked it when he was on Question Time. I liked it
yeah.
when he was, even if I disagreed with him, I appreciated the way that he communicated.
Well,
and debated. Yeah,
one of the reasons I think most people don't care much about politics is because most politicians don't care much about people.
right.
And Alan Johnson was the exception to that. He was very, very devoted to people. You know, he
Yeah,
was a people person. He was the kind of person that when he met someone and he said, "How are you?" he really wanted an answer. It wasn't just
yeah,
going through the motions. And when he was saying thank you to someone for their work, it was genuinely a show of appreciation rather than the kind of, I bet this is going to make me look good. And you saw that in all sorts of ways. Like, you know, I remember when one of the messengers, like when we were working together at the old DTI, the Department of Business, as was, where one of the messengers retired, and he took her and her best mate for a cup of tea over at the House of Lords, and it's like, and he just wanted to hear all her gossip from over the years. She'd been a ministerial messenger, like going back 40 years, so she knew the dirt on every minister going right the way back to like Wilson's government, you know. And
right.
he was just into people, and that's the thing. You can't fake that sort of thing. People who
Mm,
aren't into people, then people aren't going to be into them in return. It's reciprocated, you know.
yeah, love. Yeah, really, really good stuff. Thank you. And this idea of being yourself when you're speaking, it kind of continues that theme. Really, again, how do you help leaders to peel back the layers in that so that they can truly come across? So it's asked a bit about energy, but this idea of people being confident in being themselves in a
Mm.
public forum. I just wondered any hints and tips that you have for leaders listening about themselves of being a bit more genuine, a bit more sincere in the when they're speaking with their people, with their colleagues.
Well, I mean, invariably the starting point is when I ask them, like, how do you feel when you're giving a speech? And so many people, they're like, oh my God, I get so nervous, so wound up. I feel like people are judging me, all of this kind of stuff. And then I
Yeah,
say to them, and, you know, how do you feel when you're having dinner with your friends at home? You know, I feel relaxed, feel calm. I feel open, you know, all of these kind of feelings. And I'm just like, right, okay, so what we need to do is get you feeling like that when you're up at the podium. And then it's just, and we try and connect with that person when they're up there. So all of the associations that they're making when they're up at the podium, it's like, you're my friends, like me, we've got so much in common, you know, and you lean into those things that you have in common as well. A
yeah,
lot of people, when they're thinking about what they're trying to say to people, they instantly zoom in on the difficult bits. We disagree with this, and therefore everything that I've got to say has got to be on that disagreement. It's like, no, 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 no. Shovel that to the back. You know, start off by emphasizing what you have in common with the audience, your shared interests, your shared priorities, your shared values, shared everything, you know, and that will lend itself to a much more pleasant experience for everyone.
great, really helpful. And one of the things that I've seen you do several times, again watching on YouTube, is this idea of jamming
Mm,
with the spontaneous topic
mm,
and working through the various. I mean, in the TED talk I referred to earlier, you've got these 6 points of rhetoric that you've referred to,
mm,
and then you know, someone gave you the suggestion of Donald Trump for or against, I think, and they said
yeah.
for, which was nice. And then you kind of work through the 6 points just to bring that out. But you've done that on several other instances too. I've seen your work on that. Yeah, when
Yeah.
did you recognize that was something that would be powerful in demonstrating the point? Because it does it so beautifully, Simon. And I'm just
Thank you.
interested when you came to that realization.
I think it was something that I developed and learned over time. So when I first became Patricia Hewitt's full-time speechwriter, she said to me, read this book on speechwriting. And it was a book called Lend Me Your Ears. But no, it wasn't. It was Our Master's Voices, actually, by a guy, Professor Max Atkinson, where he did some research on political speeches back in the 80s. And that set out like some of these rhetorical devices, things like speaking in threes, using rhetorical contrasts, doing puzzle solution type things. And then I started finding out more about ancient rhetoric. So really going back to what Cicero said and Quintilian, Aristotle, all of that. And I started discovering more and more of these rhetorical devices. And I remember when I was writing speeches in government, I had like literally a page that I'd written myself,
Yes.
that I had stuck on my desk in front of me of the top 15 rhetorical devices. And literally, whenever I was trying to come up with a soundbite or a good line, I'd just run my eye down this and think, oh, I can do one of those here, do a
Yes.
rhetorical contrast, or do a metaphor, or do a bit of hyperbole, or do a rhyme, or whatever. And it would work. And then from that, I developed this 6-part formula. This is 6 steps you can take to create a super powerful speech that I've been riffing on ever since, really. And it still works so well. And I mean, I was just watching Rachel Reeves was delivering her speech at Labour Party conference this morning. And what was it she said? What was the big line from it? Anyway, it was a repetitive rule of 3. I can't remember precisely
I
what it
haven't seen it
was.
yet. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a repetitive rule of 3, and it's just like these tricks. They are absolutely timeless, and it just gives people such a quick insight to the most powerful tools of rhetoric. I'm very happy to run it through it now. If you think your
Yeah,
listeners would
please.
like to hear
I
it.
think they would. I think it's very useful actually to go through those. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so it'll take me about a minute to get through them all, but and it's 6 steps. So step 1: 3 breathless sentences. Broken homes, failing schools, sink states, profits down, markets in turmoil, competitors on the move. Sounds urgent, like you're hyperventilating. Step 2: 3 repetitive sentences. 3 sentences where you repeat the opening clause, because repetition makes you sound strong, repetition makes you sound stable, repetition makes you sound sincere, like that. Then you have 3 rhetorical contrasts, and this could be tautologies, like we're looking to the future, not the past, working together, not against one another, thinking about what we can do, not what we can't. And this makes you sound measured, not mad. Then step 4, we have a metaphor. Metaphors when we use imagery to describe something as something which it is not. Metaphors plant an ideas in people's mind. They plant an image that you hope will grow and blossom, but you don't want to get carried away. If you can taste sick in your mouth, you've gone too far. You need to save room for step number 5, which is 3 exaggerative sentences where we're working night and day, we're giving our heart and soul, we're not going to sleep until we know that everyone has the chance of a fair education in Britain, regardless of whether they went to Eton or Harrow. And then step number 6, you end with a rhyme, because rhyme is sublime and rhyme works every time. And those 6 rhetorical devices are basically all you need. And when you look at what politicians say, pretty much everything they say is one of those tricks.
Yes.
So that's it. That's my quick riff.
Masterfully done, and I love it. And actually, one of the things you mentioned towards the end there is you mentioned Eton. I think this point around rhetoric being taught at Eton but not taught anywhere else, and I know that was a passion for you a little while back. And I just wondered, what do we do to help the education system, or families even, to help get these powerful language patterns and devices into the hearts and minds of our children?
Yeah, well, I think actually there are things you can do. It is being put on the curriculum, and that is a good thing. And money is being, both of the parties now agree that oracy is something which needs to go on the curriculum. So it's not a party political point. It's a very important point. But I tell you what I think is a much, much deeper problem. And that's just the way that we raise kids generally. That I think so many parents and teachers, as they say, spend the first 3 years of your life teaching them to stand up and speak, and then the rest of their life you're telling them to sit down and shut up. And I think that is the problem. And obviously at a school like Eton, where they have a lot of 1-to-1 tuition or 1-to-6 tuition, you don't have to be telling kids to sit down and shut up. When you've got 35 kids in a class, as you do in many classes in the UK, then the whole time you're just telling kids to shut up. And that does not teach people to speak. So frankly, it's all very well putting oracy on the curriculum, but if classes are still being run in a very brutalist, dictatorial kind of style, then we're not going to get over that problem. So I think the education system needs a much deeper reboot than simply saying put things in threes, frankly.
Yeah, understood. How have you have children, Simon? You
Mm.
mentioned earlier. How have you brought this into your home? Would you say for your children?
Well, my kids are so plugged into all of this. I mean, they are so plugged into it, and to the extent that they'll call people out for their metaphors at parties and stuff like that. And um, so yeah, I always try to be careful and make sure that whenever we're speaking around the table, that they and my wife as well. My wife used to work in communications too,
Yeah.
which basically means that we're constantly manipulating this out of one another. But occasionally, like we'll join forces on the kids, and then we're a real force to be reckoned with. But no, we have great dinner table discussions where we enjoy very much, and we pride ourselves on them actually, and making sure that the kids get their say on the issues that are going around. We listen to the Today program with them in the morning, and get talking about whatever the issues are. So we do our bit. Probably when my kids are older, though, they'll be saying, my dad were, he'd give TED talks telling us to speak out, and he told me to shut up so many times. You can't get it right. You can never get it
No,
right.
no, it's hard. It's hard. Um, the six elements that you mentioned earlier, which of those would you say leaders often neglect? Like the rule of through is quite commonly
Yeah.
understood and applied. Are there any of those that you try to encourage people to dial up a bit more, or
Well,
is often neglected?
the one that is most neglected and least thought about, but for me is far and away the most powerful, is metaphor.
Hmm.
Metaphor, it has the power to completely change people's perspective on the world. And studies have shown how changing nothing more than the metaphor in a piece of text leads people to fundamentally different reactions on all sorts of questions, ranging from whether or not they want to invest in a company, support policies, even back a foreign war. Now, most of the time in business communication, people speak in mixed metaphors, and it drives me up the wall. So often I get sent like these strategy documents, PowerPoint decks, where you've got like on one page, six metaphors, sometimes in one sentence, where it's like we're laying down the foundations and we're fighting all of these fronts, we're raising the bar and, all of this. And it's just
Yeah.
horrific. And it's just like, what's the image that you really want to put in people's minds here?
Hmm.
Is it that you're on a journey? Or is it that you're building something, or is it that you're fighting? And just really, really focus on this. The best communicators will do that, and so that is really that's a brilliant one. And if you do that right for a CEO of a company, and they can develop a strong metaphorical narrative for their company where their business is, and it may be one from being a flabby company to being a fit company, or from being a
Yes.
company that's been starved of investment to one that's receiving the kind of investment that it needs after all this time, or we were losers, now we're winners, and whatever it is,
Sure.
once you get that narrative right, then it really fundamentally transforms the way that everyone in a company perceives what it is that you're doing. Whereas when you're using mixed metaphors, people just glaze over. They've got no
Yeah.
idea what you're talking about. It's
Yeah.
such a skill. And this is what the real genius communicators get right. People like your Churchills, from your Churchills, like Churchill during the war, it was like there was darkness and there was light. And it was so clear what he was talking about there, morality, where we were heading to, and everyone got it.
Yes.
Or Boris talking about, we've got an oven ready deal on Brexit. Now, regardless of your political views, your views on Brexit. Boris could motivate people, demonstrably so. More people
Yes.
came out and voted for Brexit than for any other vote in the history of our country. Now many would say, I would say, that the facts were not against him on that, but the facts were irrelevant. Facts versus a powerful metaphor. People will be led by the metaphor more than the
Yeah.
facts. Both sides will have their
It's
facts.
fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the
Yeah.
metaphor. Who's got the strongest metaphorical narrative that often determines which way people will go on these issues.
Yeah. I was working with a team a couple of weeks ago, working on a strategy session and putting together a document. And they had a document they were revisiting. It was like a year on, and I'd picked this up. And one of the points you mentioned about foundation the other day, they were operations team, so it wasn't the whole strategy for the department; it's the strategy for their function. And they'd drawn out the pillars, and then they put their operations team as the roof of this building, almost like a Roman temple, almost. And it said, "We are the foundation of the strategic pillars for the team." That was immediate kind of dissonance for me of looking at this picture and saying, "Well, why you can't be the foundation and be the roof? It doesn't make sense to me." It immediately jarred as picking up this document as an ignorant bystander.
Yeah.
And seeing this disconnect between the messaging and the image that they'd drawn on the sheet. And I think it's a really good example of kind of this missing the point,
Yeah, but I don't find that one quite as offensive as what I normally see, which is where you've got a picture of the pillars, and then they say our 4 pillars are driving change in the business in order that we can be best in class and raise the bar right across the sector. And then you're just like, forgive me, off. That's all you can say when you see that PowerPoint slide. It's all anyone can say. Whereas at least if they're sticking within a construction frame, that's better than some.
Fair point. Anyway, they've changed it as a result of my challenge, but it's really interesting point there. So the power of metaphor, I love that. Really useful. Well, Simon, all of these things have been really useful for any leader to think about how they're communicating, how they get their message across. Maybe similar to my question around the 6 points, you've got various books that you've written around speech writing and influence and inspiring others. What you've been on podcasts like this before and are asked to speak about your work. What area haven't we spoken about today that we should have done?
Storytelling, actually, I think is something that we've missed. The power of story. I mean, when you asked me about how I got into speechwriting, how my interest developed, I responded to you, I hope with some stories, and those stories that's because you're a good interviewer, Simon. So you've got stories out of me. And those stories are the bits that will stick in people's minds from this podcast. And so when people are doing presentations, I always try and get people to get the story in there. And it is finding some kind of connection between whatever the point is that they're trying to make, and some story from their life. When people are listening to facts, stats, their attention will start to wane. Whereas as soon as someone starts telling a story, you just instantly feel the energy in a room transform. And it's almost like pulling people's heads up. You can see all of a sudden everyone's chins lift up just as soon as you hear these words. I'll never forget what this person said to me, like back in February of last year. Someone said to me, 5 words I'll never forget as long as I live. And all of a sudden everyone's like, ooh, this sounds interesting. And so that's the other thing that I think is really, really powerful.
Why is that so intriguing? Why is that so intriguing to the listener? So what's that doing for us? I totally agree with you. What is it about that draws the audience in?
Well, it's our expectation then of resolution. We've set up a problem, we've set up a question, and then you're desperate for the resolution to come in. You can't have it. These are 5 words I'll remember for the rest of my life. You just put it there then. And people are like, what are the 5 words? And you can
Yeah.
drive people mad with this. And I'll come back to this at the end of my speech. In 20 minutes, I'll come back to what those 5 words were. But in
Yeah.
the meantime, let's look at our strategy. And
Yeah.
they'll kind of hate you for doing that, but they'll be listening because they need the resolution. It's the reward network in the brain, basically. So they're waiting for
Yeah.
that dopamine payoff.
Yeah. Brilliant. Love that. And so what would be the top tip on storytelling? One, tell a story, but what how do I tell it well?
Transport people back there. So close your eyes and take yourself back to that moment and like have it running in front of you, like you are sitting watching it again on a TV screen. Get the image so it's really, really clear. Get all of the
Yeah.
details clear, get all of the sounds clear. And then when you're ready, step yourself back into that picture and play the video again, but you're in it and you're looking around and you're there. Remember how it looked, remember how it sounded, remember how you felt. And then that's the story. So I do that with my clients. I get them to close their eyes, to go back to that moment in time. Tell me, what was it like when your dad said those 5 words to you? What was it like? Take me back to that time. Close your eyes. And then how did you feel? Oh God, I felt like that. And then and literally, I've got my phone recording what they're saying and transcribing what they're saying. And that is then, you're then like, whoa, that's it. That's the start. That's the start of the speech,
That's great. Yeah. Really nice device. So Simon, what I was thinking was that this point seems to link to the very first one of your leadership lessons, which you wish to learn early, which is about being yourself. That there's this outer story that we can tell, but if we can get some mastery over our inner stories, it can help us to be more of ourselves. So that narrative we were talking about earlier, where we might say, I'm going to need to use bigger words or speak posher or whatever it is because of the story I'm telling myself, that I may not be seen as educated because I've come from this background. And then actually I've got to master that story to be able to be a better master of the outer story is some
That's
sense
right.
I have anyway of joining the two bits together.
I think that's right. And it is about having mastery of your inner story. That's your words, not mine. But I like that because I think that the self that you present to the world does need to be mastered. And I think there's an important point there that because sometimes people think about being authentic and they're like, this means that I need to show everyone who I am, warts and all, and it means I need to show bad things to people or things that have upset me or whatever. And it's like, no, 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 no. You just need to show them something of yourself that you're happy to show. It can be the
Yeah.
tiniest little bit of ankle. You don't need to like, reveal everything, tell the story of yourself that you are happy to share. It doesn't need to be uncomfortable. It needs to be a positive story that makes you feel good. If it doesn't make you feel
Yeah.
good telling that story, then you probably shouldn't be telling it. And I think there is a thing there. One of my friends who's David Pullen, actually, he'll be a good guest for your podcast. He runs a company called Story Spotters.
Great.
Really good. And he has this line, which I really like, which is you should show people your scars and not your wounds. And I think that's really good. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
And, like my thing about growing up in a poor background, I don't mind telling that because that is actually to me now a source of pride, whereas before it was a source of shame. But now I feel quite
Yes.
proud that I came from that background and I've done well, whereas
Yes.
beforehand I was ashamed of it. But there is still some aspects of my background, my upbringing, that it would upset me too much to talk about, and I'm not going to go there,
Yeah.
And so it's showing what you're comfortable to show.
I'm grateful for the scars and wounds point. I'll remember that. That's a really nice way of
Yeah. Credit David
capturing
Pullen.
it.
David Pullen.
Thank you, David. And I hope a future guest. Simon, we need to wrap this up. It's been as thrilling a conversation as I hoped it would be, just to go on the journey with you around some of these rhetorical devices. And I guess I'd love to just find out what's been a takeaway for you from this conversation.
Mastery of your story. I really liked that line, actually. mastery of your inner story, that line that you came up with. I quite like that. I think that's yeah, it's not the way that I would have put it or the way that I have put it, but I like that, mastering your inner story. So thank you for that. That's a nice new perspective for me.
Great. And I have received an upsurge in my appetite for being better at my metaphors. Actually, it's an area I love to play around with
Hmm.
and have a bit more confidence to go there more frequently, I think. Blended with the other things, of course. Because I do take your point around when you feel a bit sick in your mouth that you've gone too far. But I will be certain to play in that space a little bit more frequently than I have been recently. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, I
Yeah.
saw on your website that you had a little video where you were saying "be the light," and so a
Yes.
wonderful example of using metaphor very, very effectively, and it does. It's very nice. And hopefully, you didn't taste sick in your mouth when you were doing that video, because that's the
No,
test.
I
That's the
didn't.
measure.
Well, I love it. I do like visual language. It's something and maybe that's I've been drawn to some of your speeches. One of the things that I felt with the light piece is it's so easy to bring darkness to a
Mm,
conversation. It's a little bit maybe the scars and wounds. It's so easy to bring the wounds to a conversation rather than the scars. And I think it takes mastery again to decide to bring light to a dialogue rather
yeah,
than to to turn the lights out and
yeah,
everyone leaves completely deflated and bruised and battered and all those kind of things because they've bumped into things in the darkness that you've kind of shed. I'm trying to work with
yeah.
the metaphor here, Simon. I hope you can. I'm trying to not to mix my
You're
metaphors.
smashing it. You're absolutely smashing it. This is like the Malaysian preacher. This is brilliant. You're making me want to give it all to you, Simon. So that's it. That's amazing.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. There we go.
Job done. So the next time that I'm doing a podcast and someone says, "What's the best speech you've ever heard?" and you'll say, "Oh God, this guy was interviewing me on Simon Fagg. He was interviewing me on his podcast. Be the light." And oh my God. Now, whenever I walk into a room, I'm like, "Where are the lamps? Where are the lamps?" Looking for the light everywhere.
Simon, thank you for your great work. I look forward to continuing to watch you in action, and thank you for how you actually really simply help those tools of rhetoric come to life for people to be able to apply them in the way that they communicate. I think it's a great service to leaders throughout the world. So wish you the very best of success as you continue to do that. And thank you for being so open with us and joining us on this episode of our podcast.
Brilliant.
Look forward to meeting again. Thank you, Simon.
Cheers, Simon. You take care.
Thanks. Our after dinner leadership conversation is finished. Our guest has left, and you're still here. Now, of course, you're very welcome. I'm glad that you found the conversation to be engaging. There's a few things that I'd like to ask you to do before you do leave. The first one of those is if you can stop and think about somebody who you think would enjoy this conversation, a friend, a colleague, perhaps an aspiring leader. The second thing, stop and hit subscribe or follow. And then the third thing is to start doing something. Perhaps there's a little idea or a concept that we've been discussing today that you think you could apply even a little bit tomorrow, tonight, and to put it into action. I encourage you to use this as a catalyst to do something different, do something more interesting, do something more exciting. And thank you so much for joining us. And please tune in again for another after dinner leadership conversation. You can leave now. I need to go and do the dishes.